When thinking of the most brutal war in European history, many immediately think of the First or Second World War, perhaps also of Napoleon's brutal campaigns. But there is one conflict that surpasses all of these and took about 1/3 of the total population in Germany to their deaths. In comparison, it was less than 10% during the Second World War. There were no families at that time who did not have fallen loved ones to mourn. The conflict swept through Europe like an unstoppable inferno, not only pulling kingdoms and empires into its vortex, but also claiming the lives of millions of innocent people. Rarely can we observe such brutalization and extreme cruelty in the population as during that time. Of course, we are talking about the 30 Years' War, the most brutal war that Europe likely experienced in its entire history. But how did this conflict come about? Why was it fought so brutally, and why did it herald a completely new era in Europe? All these questions will be addressed in today's video. Let's first take a look at how the conflict began and how a spiral of violence gradually unfolded. Europe at the beginning of the 17th century was, proverbially speaking, a powder keg. The greatest point of contention was the religious tensions. Martin Luther's theses of 1517 and the subsequent spread of Protestantism challenged the authority of the Roman Catholic Church and the Pope. This led to significant tensions between the followers of the new Protestant denominations and the Catholics, which were further intensified by the Counter-Reformation under Pope Paul III. The religious conflicts were further exacerbated by the complicated political power structures in Europe. The Holy Roman Empire of the German nation, a loose federation of hundreds of principalities, free cities, and other territories, was particularly prone to conflict. The emperor of the empire, usually from the House of Habsburg, was Catholic and often in conflict with the Protestant princes within the empire. And so, soon enough, the tension would come to a head. The religious and political conflicts in the Holy Roman Empire were further complicated by the rivalries between the great European powers such as France, Spain, Sweden, and Denmark. These powers were aiming to strengthen their own positions in Europe while weakening their rivals. Moreover, the economic and social situation was already disastrous before the war. This was due to extremely high inflation, partially caused by the influx of silver from the New World, annual crop failures, food shortages, and social unrest. There were repeated peasant uprisings and unrest in the cities. However, all of these events would be far surpassed by what began in 1618. Let's take a look at Bohemia, one of the largest territories within the Holy Roman Empire of the German nation. Bohemia was one of the regions where Protestantism had taken root. Approximately 90% of the population adhered to the new faith. Nonetheless, a Catholic, King Ferdinand II of Bohemia, who was also the emperor of the entire Holy Roman Empire, continued to rule. Many nobles in Bohemia viewed this as an affront and saw their religious freedom threatened. To express their frustration, they threw several of his officials out of the windows of Prague Castle in what became known as the Defenestration of Prague. For the emperor, this was an incredible humiliation, and he now feared losing Bohemia to the Protestants. We must consider that Bohemia had always been the deciding factor. For a long time, the emperor was elected by the 7 electors. Brandenburg, Saxony, and the Palatinate were always Protestant, while the 3 ecclesiastical princes of Cologne, Trier, and Mainz were Catholic. This meant that if Bohemia were to become Protestant, the emperor would lose his power. And so he reacted with extreme violence to the uprisings in Bohemia. He formed the Catholic League, and allied himself with Maximilian, the Duke of Bavaria, as well as the devoutly Catholic King of Spain. Together, they assembled a massive army to reclaim Bohemia. The first major battle of the war, the Battle of White Mountain, resulted in the recapture of Bohemia. However, the consequences of the defenestration of Prague deepened the divide between the religious factions, further widening the rift between Ferdinand II and the Protestant princes, many of whom now feared for their power and formed a counter-alliance, the Protestant Union. Other European states also saw this as their opportunity to break free from the dominance of the Habsburgs, who had sat on the throne of the Holy Roman Empire of the German nation for almost 2 centuries, and also ruled in Spain and the Netherlands. Thus, we had a simultaneous war between the various territories within the Holy Roman Empire, as well as a conflict between the various states of Europe. The Protestants then called for help from abroad. The King of Denmark joined the conflict first, followed later by Sweden and France. Although France was Catholic, it was eager to curb the power of the Habsburgs. We can see, therefore, that there were no clear lines between the different factions, and so the conflict gradually spread beyond what is now Germany and its borders. New invading armies repeatedly followed, laying the regions to waste. The conflict is, of course, far too extensive to cover in just one video, so here is only a brief summary. First, the Catholic League triumphed in Bohemia. This, however, prompted Christian IV, the King of Denmark, to take action. The immensely wealthy man assembled a massive army and devastated the Catholic lands of Germany from north to south. He was only decisively defeated in 1629. But shortly afterward, the King of Sweden entered the war. He too plundered the lands and secured significant victories against the Catholics, although he died in 1632 in the Battle of Lutzen. Following this, France actively intervened in the war and led a new invading army through Germany, resulting in more brutal battles. Meanwhile, the princes and kings of the Holy Roman Empire continued to wage war against one another, and Catholic armies also repeatedly ravaged Germany. It wasn't until 1643 that all factions had become so exhausted from the decades of war that they began seeking peace. Diplomats from the warring nations gathered in Münster and Osnabrück to negotiate peace, but these negotiations would drag on for another 5 long years, during which the war continued unabated. This meant that what was negotiated today could already be outdated by tomorrow, as the situation on the battlefield constantly shifted. This made the peace process extremely challenging. However, in 1648, the Peace of Westphalia was finally concluded, which was intended to ensure lasting peace. The peace limited the power of the Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire of the German nation and emphasized the religious freedoms of the individual states within the empire. The independence of the Netherlands and Switzerland was confirmed by all parties, and Sweden and France gained new territories and significantly increased their power. The biggest losers were primarily the Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire and Spain. The biggest winner was France, which laid the foundation for its later rise to great power. The Peace of Westphalia is often regarded as the birth of the modern state system. It laid the foundation for the concept of sovereign states and international law. The treaties established a new balance of power in Europe, which lasted until the rise of Napoleon. But why was the war so exceptionally brutal? One obvious reason is, of course, the war itself, with its countless battles. However, a large portion of the population actually died from other causes. Foremost among these were famines and food shortages. The repeated movement of armies, the plundering and destruction of fields and crops led to widespread famine. Agriculture was severely affected as many farmers fought in the war, making the supply of basic foodstuffs highly uncertain. These conditions, along with poor hygiene, overcrowded camps, and the movement of large groups of people, also encouraged the spread of diseases such as the plague, typhus, and dysentery. These epidemics further decimated the population. Moreover, the economy in many parts of Germany completely collapsed. Cities and villages were destroyed, trade routes were disrupted, and economic production ground to a halt in many areas. This led to even more poverty and misery. In the end, more than one-third of the approximately 18 million inhabitants of the Holy Roman Empire likely lost their lives. Some historians even speak of nearly half. It would take Europe decades to recover from this conflict.